Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program, we thought we would talk about something that most people are aware of, but very few of us really understand how to follow through with to make it work, and that is that of communication. After all, many of us by the time we're in midlife have at least been through at least one relationship and perhaps are on our second. Now ask yourself this question. Did you just start a relationship or a marriage and you find yourself away from the honeymoon phase wondering how come you feel so distant? What is it about each other that you're really beginning to get on each other's nerves and you can't quite seem to bridge the gap that's causing this? Well, perhaps today as you listen to what we are bringing to you, you'll find that yourself might be in what is considered about one of the four horsemen of the relationship apocalypse. Things such as denigration, denial, dismissal, and distraction. Our guest joining us on the program today has reached nearly 250 million people around the world with his relationship communication advice, and he's even flown on the radar of one such luminary as Dr. John Gray, best known as Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. His newest book is More Love, Less Conflict. It's a communication playbook for couples. I'd like to welcome the Beyond 50 radio program today, relationship expert Jonathan Robinson. Jonathan, thank you for being on the program today.
Thank you. This is going to be fun, Daniel. I look forward to it.
Well, relationships always can be, and I think the biggest reason that you point out is what we don't know about and nobody really says is they're definitely mirrors about who we are.
Yeah, you get to, what you give is what you get in relationships a lot of the time, and the good news is that if you learn to communicate just a little bit differently, you can create completely different outcomes in how your relationship feels.
Now, that's exactly what you talk about, and I was kind of surprised with the simplicity of what you share here. So why don't we first of all start with what happened in your life that moved you into this direction to help others to be able to nurture and grow their relationships?
Well, I was blessed to have a completely dysfunctional and violent family. I say blessed because that got me at the ripe old age of 12 to look into self-help books to figure out some way out of my predicament of being depressed.
12 years old?
Yeah.
Wow, that's unusual. Usually people aren't doing it until they're in their mid-20s or later.
Right. I had my midlife crisis early. So, I started to see I had no friends at the time, and I was depressed, but I saw that if you learn how to communicate better, you can make friends quickly, and you can solve problems really fast. So as I started to use the methods, I found that they worked incredibly well, and eventually it led to me being on Oprah a lot and speaking to large groups. And the only thing that had really changed was the quality of my communication. So I kind of became like a proselytizer of that. And, in fact, one of the times when I was on Oprah, she had a similar story where, she was so poor, she sometimes went hungry, and she was raped twice by the time she was 14. But she said she decided to focus on caring for people and understanding them, and that turned out pretty good. She's now the most loved person on earth.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now, communication is something you hear thrown around with. Basically, it's common ground. The best way to get your relationship is to communicate. But it's one thing when you're talking, and it's another thing if you actually listen. And the question is, what are you saying and what is being heard seems to be that gray area that we really need to clarify, and that's what you really talk about.
Yeah, when stressed, I forget all the theory.
I think a lot of us do.
Yeah. So what I tried to do is come up with the 40 best methods that could be done in under 30 seconds that could totally change the communication around, like a certain phrase and why it works, a certain fill in the blank why it works. And it's those little things that if you do them can make all the difference. I mean, look at Oprah once again. She's the most powerful woman on earth. It's all because she's really good at giving empathy and really good at listening. And that just skyrocketed her. So people who learn how to, for example, understand their partner and give empathy, it's almost like they have a superpower. And you can spread that love around because you know how to create it.
So let's go ahead and talk specifically about what empathy is so that our listeners have a clearer understanding.
Well, empathy is where the person you're talking to feels like you really get them, that you get what they're feeling and you get why they feel that way, and you kind of feel their pain or their joy. And it's something that we really want from people, and most people are terrible at giving it. So the few people who can really give empathy and understanding, they shine, and they tend to do a lot better in relationships, and they also tend to do a lot better at work because, if you give people what they want, they'll give you what you want.
I couldn't agree with you more. Let's go ahead and talk about, I know I'm going to go ahead and give 5 aspects when we're talking about this here so people have a clear idea. I'll just go ahead and say the 5 of them, and we'll kind of go through them a little bit to give people an understanding. To talk about curiosity, generosity, vulnerability, gratitude, and responsibility. And when I looked at this very short list of 5 here, I realized, wow, that's absolutely right, that if you can come into practice, and it's not for the sake of manipulation to get what you want. In fact, if you do that, then you're not really grasping what we're talking about here. So let's go ahead and go through those and give people an idea of how the communication style can become more effective, especially on your side toward empathy when that's what you're looking to do.
Sure. Well, each of these, not only do I say it's a good thing to have, but I give like a method that generally can be done in under 20 seconds that can allow it to blossom, like with curiosity. Just ask your partner questions as to why they feel that way, or say, I'd like to understand you. Try to describe to me why you're looking at it this way. When people feel understood and that you care about them, then it really disarms them and helps them to relax and get to a place where you're on the same team again. And then there's things like responsibility. I don't know about you, Daniel, but every time I've blamed my partner, my wife of 20 years, she's never responded with blame by saying, oh, yeah, now I see what you're talking about. Yeah, thank you for showing me the errors of my ways. That's never happened. I don't know about you. But
no, it usually doesn't.
Yeah, right. So when two people are trying to figure out who's right and who's wrong, that never goes anywhere. So one thing you can do is say, well, just complete the sentence. One way I see that I contributed to this upset is. And when you take some responsibility, it opens up the door for your partner to take responsibility, and you're no longer just trying to blame each other. So little things like that can make a big difference. And then, there's things like generosity, where you're trying to be kind. The best predictor of how happy couples are is the number of appreciations they say to each other. Now, I get caught up in work, and I sometimes forget to appreciate my wife, so I actually have Siri on my iPhone remind me every day to say something, like, honey, I really appreciate that you did my dishes last night. That really, really meant a lot to me. Little things like that help to keep love flowing, and when you think those things but you don't say it, both people really lose out.
Now, I like that one on responsibility because I realize, too, and this is going to sound probably very unusual for people to hear listening, but in responsibility, when you take 100% responsibility for whatever situation that you're in, you'll find that life as well as the solutions get a lot easier. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, if you look at the word responsibility, it kind of tells you about that. Response-ability.
Oh, okay. There you go. Never thought about it that way.
That you now have an ability to create anything you want if you are taking responsibility. And people, instead, what they often do is they fall into victimhood and blame. And I call it the complain, blame, and shame way to try to get your partner to change. But that doesn't work. So when you learn a new way to get your partner to change, that involves things like responsibility and making specific requests and all the methods I have in the More Love, Less Conflict book, you're just astounded at the results because, wow, this actually works, and the other one was kind of like hitting your head against the wall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, let's talk about vulnerability. That one there was quite an interesting one because you talked also about an exercise that you did about trying to travel across the country with no money.
Right. Well, things are so fast-paced now, and everybody's so, hype and the whole thing that we got going in our culture that when somebody's just very human and vulnerable, it's very powerful. And it's a way that we connect. If you look at the word intimacy, the instructions for finding it are really in the word, into me see. So when you reveal stuff about yourself, it opens a door to touch somebody else's heart. And what my experiment was I was just, I went across the country with no money, and when I was hungry, I would just knock on random doors and say, hey, I have no money and I'm hungry. Would you be willing to give me something so I can make it through the day? And like 90% of people were helpful because they saw that I really was sincere and vulnerable. And when we see that somebody's sincere and vulnerable, it really impacts us.
And it's. I wanted to go back to the one that we mentioned earlier, curiosity. When it comes to asking questions, and there's really a way that you should be doing that. Let's go ahead and give a little more clarity on that one.
Sure. I have in the More Love, Less Conflict book a thing called a curiosity game, where you just for 5 minutes ask your partner questions to try to better understand them. So it's not like they're responding in a dialogue. You just say, well, I'm curious about this. I see that you're upset, but I don't really understand what story you have as to why you're upset or why this impacted you so much. And you really come from curiosity rather than trying to make them wrong or trying to prove yourself right, which is how we often speak. And it's very powerful. I never have couples come into my office and say, Jonathan, we really understand each other quite well, and that's why we want a divorce. That doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. But I do have couples come in and say, he just doesn't understand me, or she just doesn't understand me, I want a divorce. So if you can get to a place where you really understand how your partner thinks and feels by asking them questions, curious questions, that's very powerful and almost always leads back to a place of love.
Now, gratitude was a big one, and I really liked how you outlined that one and realizing that you took a little trip to India.
Yeah, it's a funny story. I realized that gratitude makes people feel good, and if you feel grateful for your partner, it really helps bring the love alive. And a friend of mine had gone to India, and he said he got this special magical mantra from a guru there that helped him to feel overwhelming gratitude towards his wife and kids. And so I asked him, would you tell me what it is? And he said, no, you're going to have to go to India and get it from the guru yourself. Well, I didn't want to do that, but I always liked, the best technique. So I traveled all the way to India, 18,000 miles away. Finally get there. It's, I'm jet lagged and worn out, but I get a chance to talk to the guru, and I say, please give me this magical mantra, and for feeling gratitude. And he says in an Indian accent, yes, my mantra is the most powerful mantra on earth. And he leans in to whisper into my ear, and he says, whenever possible, repeat these words when you see your partner or your kids. The mantra I give you are the words, thank you. Well, I look at him and I say, thank you, that's it? I traveled 18,000 miles to get thank you, that's it? And he says, no. That's it is the mantra you have been using, and that makes them feel like they never are enough. My mantra is thank you, not that's it. That's it will take you nowhere. So,
wow.
So it's interesting. I was pissed off, but I tried it, and I would say internally, thank you when I saw my wife in the morning. Thank you when I saw my dogs. thank you when she would smile. And it just changed how I felt. And it like was opening a little crack in the door that allowed more and more love to come through.
Now, it's pretty amazing, like I was saying earlier in the show, the simplicity of this, but even as simple as it is, it still takes time and practice, and that's because we would have what you could call trouble at the border or obstacles. And a lot of times this may come from, for instance, the kind of modeling we had from watching our parents growing up. In fact, you give a couple of examples of, for instance, there was a husband, or it could have even been you, that enjoyed rubbing or massaging a shoulder, and the reaction that occurred to that. Now, let's talk about what was going on there in that instance. And, because this is really important for people to come to understand that a lot of times our reactions to things don't stem from what's actually happening, but our perception or filter of what we believe is happening.
Yeah, it comes from our conditioning in the past. And a lot of couples don't really know what their partner likes, either in bed or out of bed. They haven't asked the specific questions. So in the book, I actually have very specific questions so you can give your partner exactly what they want. In this case, this was a long time ago where I was massaging a girlfriend, and she said, "Would you cut that out?" And I said, "Well, I'm just giving you a massage." She said, "Well, I don't like it. You're always grabbing me." And I said, "Well, this is to show you that I love you." And she said, "Well, I don't feel very loved. You never tell me that you love me," which was true. Now, we had to talk about this, and it ends up, when I was younger, my stepfather, when I did something bad, he would beat me with a belt, but before he would do that, he would say, "I'm doing this because I love you." So the words "I love you" to me meant I'm about to beat the crap out of you. Now, the words "I love you" to her meant "I love you." But I didn't associate the words "I love you" with love. I associated massage with love. Now, she associated massage with getting molested because when her uncle used to give her like shoulder massages, and one day that uncle molested her. So she took my massages as a sign of impending doom. Now, I thought I was doing something loving, but in reality, I didn't know what was loving to her, so I was not actually doing what was loving to her.
Yeah, I see. And again, what was fascinating about that was realizing that, this was a past experience that somebody was playing out in this reality. So the question becomes then, how do we begin to communicate or ask questions so that we can be empathetic, to that side where and rather than getting somebody on the defensive, they realize their heart is softened, as you would say, and they're more in tune with wanting to, perhaps offer suggestions as to how things could be better or different.
Yeah. Well, I think everybody's busy now, so I try to make it as easy as possible. In the More Love, Less Conflict book, I actually have what's called the 12 questions of instant intimacy, and then the 12 questions of empathy and understanding. And in fact, people can download it for free on my morelovelessconflict.com website. It's called the 12 Questions of Instant Intimacy. When you know what questions to ask and you get the information, like what helps you to feel loved, what do you really enjoy in bed, what don't you care for in bed, when you find out the right information, things go a lot better.
Right.
So the problem is most people don't take the time, or they don't think of asking those questions, and their relationship suffers as a result, or isn't as good as it could be.
Now, how often do you see people actually getting a lot of aha moments as a result of the work that you share here, especially in the book?
Well, I get a lot of emails from people, and often the response is that people are really surprised at how effective it is. Like just giving empathy to their partner, how it changed the whole nature of the relationship. They may have been arguing for the last 3 years, and in 10 minutes it changes something around. Because I don't think people understand that there's some advanced communication methods that really can make a difference. We all communicate, but the way that we've done it doesn't really consistently create more love and less conflict. It tends to be for, showing who's right and who's wrong, and that doesn't go anywhere. So I get a lot of emails saying, I did this method that you suggested, it would only take 30 seconds, and my God, I can't believe what happened. I have couples that come into my office on the verge of divorce, and, with the right method, they change something around. To me, it looks like a miracle, because love is the most important thing in the world. And if you can go from hate and aggravation and annoyance to love in just a minute, that's a miracle. So I hate to be too enthusiastic, but to me, this stuff really can make a difference in people's lives. And it certainly made a difference in my life. I mean, going from no friends to being able to reach millions of people, it's really just learning how to communicate more effectively.
Now, here's something, and I really enjoyed this chapter because it helped give a lot more clarity, and this is kind of one of those hidden obstacles, if you will, and that is triggers. What are those exactly?
Yeah, that's a good example. Everybody has triggers. I have triggers, you have triggers. But couples never talk about, okay, here are my 4 biggest triggers. If you're going to talk about these 4 subjects, just know that you're walking along landmines, So I tell couples to list their triggers and to say, instead of saying this to me about this trigger, I would appreciate it if you did this instead. So my wife and I used to spend, early on in our marriage, a lot of time dealing with these triggers. And, of course, it never went anywhere. We just get upset. And so we had this conversation. We wrote out what our triggers were and what we'd prefer instead. And we just don't have to deal with that anymore, I try not to step on her landmine. She tries not to step on mine. And we haven't had an argument in 5 years, whereas early on in our marriage, we were, triggering each other all over the place. So having some understanding, some communication, some knowledge about how to avoid triggers and how to sidestep them or how to deal with them when you have to deal with them it saves a lot of time and a lot of heartache.
Well, there's no doubt about that. And like you said, too, when people start really applying this, it's funny how it actually can work in other ways in life. And as you said, it becomes very reciprocal. It's not a matter of what you're trying to take or manipulate, but how you're learning to give. So when it comes to questions like that, for instance, what's a good way to, let's say, talk to your partner? For instance, we were talking earlier about the massage on the shoulder situation, whereas she was saying, well, I tell you I love you, but you never say that back. So, a matter of finding out what it is they want. What is a good way that our listeners can leave today thinking, okay, maybe I can ask better questions more specifically? Tell us how that works.
Yeah. Well, some simple questions can make a huge difference, like asking your partner, when were 3 times that you felt like I really, really loved you and you felt really connected to me? And then what was it about those times that helped you to know that I totally loved you? Was it something I said? Was it something I did? Was it or something, a look on my face? And you'll see patterns that are very useful to you. My wife really likes hearing the words "I love you." The words "I love you" don't mean anything to me. In fact, they remind me of my childhood, which wasn't so pleasant. So, but I tell her I love you, and it makes a big difference in how loved she feels. That only came about because I asked those specific questions. And she knows that the way I receive love is through shoulder massages, and touch. So she does that a lot to me, and we both feel loved a lot. And when both partners feel really loved, good things happen. So a lot of these things are worked out just by having better communication and better understanding of your partner and asking better questions.
Wow. Now, I'm curious, again, this is something we've kind of skimmed the surface in many ways, but hopefully given our listeners some clues as to how they can, at least get started. But certainly, More Love, Less Conflict is a book certainly worth getting. Now, how can people find out more about how to go about getting the book, things like that?
Well, I actually have a website called morelovelessconflict.com, and you can read the first chapter for free. You can get the book. You can download for free the 12 questions of instant intimacy and ask those questions of a partner or a friend, and you'll find that with the right method, things can really, you can get back to that love and that passion that we're all really yearning for, but sometimes lose with the pace of modern day life.
And your website again?
morelovelessconflict.com.
Very good. Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the Beyond 50 radio program. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Daniel. Thanks for asking great questions.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. You can also discover more at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50, beyond50radio.com. Keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.